Struggling farmer helps a city girl start her car. He never expected she was the daughter of a tech billionaire. The sun was merciless above the dusty country road, stretching over miles of farmland without a single sign of shade. Heat shimmered across the landscape, distorting the distance, turning the world into a furnace. At the center of this heat wave stood Rachel Whitmore, heels sunk into dry soil, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, one hand on her hip and the other holding her phone to the sky like a wand to summon signal. "Seriously?" she muttered, staring at her screen. No bars, no connection, no help. Beside her, a silver sports car sat with its hood up, steam rising like a white flag from the engine. She kicked one of the front tires, then immediately recoiled, regretting the move in her expensive heels. Unbelievable. Stuck in the middle of a cornfield like it's the 1800S. In the distance, the low rumble of an engine approached. A faded red pickup truck, dented and worn, chugged down the road, kicking up a cloud of dirt behind it. Rachel straightened, instantly suspicious, brushing imaginary dust off her skirt. The truck slowed to a stop beside her. The window rolled down to reveal a man with sun-worn skin, broad shoulders, and a calm presence. His flannel shirt was rolled at the sleeves, and his hands were stained with earth and work. "You all right there, miss?" he asked, voice even and relaxed. Rachel crossed her arms. "Define all right." "I'm stuck, no signal, and I'm pretty sure I'm surrounded by nothing but corn and cows." The man smiled faintly. "Looks like your car's overheated." "Wow, you think?" she snapped, then immediately caught herself. "Sorry, it's just been a day." He didn't seem offended. "Name's Tom. I live down that way." He gestured to the horizon. "Mind if I take a look?" Rachel hesitated, studying him. He didn't seem dangerous, just annoyingly calm. "Be my guest. But this is a high-end model, not your average farm truck." Tom chuckled. "I figured, but an engine's still an engine." He hopped out, walked to the front of the car, and started inspecting the components. Rachel leaned against the passenger door, arms still crossed, watching him with a mixture of doubt and reluctant hope. After a few minutes, he wiped his hands on a rag. "Try starting it now." She slipped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered to life, then died again with a sharp cough. She groaned, smacking the steering wheel. Tom stepped back, squinting at the horizon. "Looks like a storm's brewing." Rachel looked up. Thick clouds had rolled in fast. Thunder echoed faintly, and the first drops of rain splattered against the windshield. "Of course," she muttered. "Just perfect." "You're not gonna get far if that engine keeps flooding," Tom said. "Best bet's to wait it out somewhere dry." Rachel gave him a long look. "Let me guess. You're about to offer your rustic cabin in the woods." He gave a small smile. "It's a farmhouse, and yeah, I am." She glanced at the horizon, where the sky was turning charcoal gray, then at the road behind her. It was already starting to flood with water and mud. "Fine," she huffed. "Lead the way." Back in his truck, Tom turned slowly down a gravel path. Rachel followed in her car for about half a mile, before the road became impassable. She sighed and abandoned the vehicle, grabbing her handbag and heels as she stepped gingerly through the growing puddles. By the time they reached the farmhouse, the rain was a curtain. Tom held the screen door open as she stepped in, drenched, makeup running, hair flat against her head. "Great," she mumbled. "Now I look like a drowned poodle." Tom handed her a towel and pointed to the fireplace. "You can dry off here. I'll get the kettle going." The house was small but warm, filled with the scent of old wood and something faintly sweet, cinnamon maybe. Rachel stood stiffly, awkward in the space, her heels off, her pride wrinkled. As thunder boomed outside, she glanced around the room. There were family photos, children's drawings, and a pair of worn boots by the door. This place wasn't hers, not even close, and yet, for the first time all day, she wasn't alone. She sank slowly onto the couch, towel clutched in her lap, and sighed. This wasn't how she planned to spend her weekend, but it was the beginning of something she never could have planned for. Rachel stood in the center of the farmhouse kitchen, eyes wide with disbelief as she scanned the room. The place was small and aged, with mismatched wooden cabinets, an ancient stove, and a cast-iron kettle that whistled softly on the stove. There were no gleaming marble counters or high-tech appliances here, just hand-washed dishes stacked neatly beside the sink, and a calendar with handwritten notes marking chores and birthdays. "Is that?" "A wood-burning water heater," she asked, pointing toward the back of the house, where steam rose gently from a small metal tank. Tom, drying his hands on a dish towel, nodded. "Yup, been using it for years. Does the job." Rachel blinked. "No Wi-Fi, no espresso machine? Not even a microwave?" Tom smirked. "We've got a coffee pot and a fireplace. Covers most of life's needs." She scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "And I thought getting a flat tire in Beverly Hills was bad." Tom didn't reply. He simply turned back to the kettle and poured her a cup of hot tea, setting it gently on the table with a quiet, "Here." Rachel took it, but didn't sit. Instead, she wandered around the room, examining everything with a kind of detached curiosity, as if she were on a reality show where the city girl gets dropped into a pioneer homestead. In the dining room, Ruth, Tom's mother, was setting the table. Her movements were slow but purposeful, her hands steady despite age. The meal was simple: a pot of vegetable stew, a loaf of fresh cornbread, and sliced apples with cinnamon. Rachel looked at the food and raised an eyebrow. "Is this dinner?" Ruth gave a warm, genuine smile. "It's not fancy, honey, but it's made with love." Rachel forced a polite nod and took her seat. Tom sat across from her, quiet, observant. He watched her reactions with measured patience, his eyes more expressive than his words. Ruth served everyone a bowl, her hands shaking just slightly as she handed one to Rachel. "I hope you'll like it. It's one of Tom's favorites." Rachel picked up her spoon with hesitation and took a small bite. She chewed slowly, her expression unreadable, then set the spoon down. "It's fine," she said. "Just not really what I'm used to." Ruth chuckled gently. "Well, maybe it'll grow on you." Throughout the meal, Rachel mostly picked at her food, occasionally glancing at her phone and groaning when she remembered again that there was no service. Tom spoke little, responding when spoken to, but his gaze lingered on Rachel longer each time she wrinkled her nose or sighed audibly. After dinner, Rachel excused herself from the table and stepped outside, pacing along the porch until she found just enough bars of signal near the fence. She dialed quickly. A few seconds later, a friend picked up. "Oh my God, Maddie, you will not believe where I am," Rachel hissed, her voice half laughing, half exasperated. "This place? It's like stepping into the dark ages. There's no Wi-Fi, no Uber, no oat milk lattes. They heat water with firewood. I feel like I'm living in some historic reenactment." Her voice rose as she vented. "Honestly, if I don't get out of here soon, I might start churning butter and wearing bonnets. It's literally like the Stone Age." She laughed, oblivious to the quiet footsteps behind her. Tom had stepped out to take out the trash, only to freeze as he heard her words. He stood there silently, the shadows hiding his face. After a moment, he turned without saying a word and walked back inside, the screen door creaking closed behind him. Rachel ended the call, sighing heavily, then slowly turned to go back inside. She didn't know what he'd heard. She didn't see the shift in his eyes, not yet. But something had cracked that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small fracture in the space between two people who had started off as strangers and who were about to discover how much they could change each other's world. The next morning, the sky was painted in soft gold, the breeze mild, the fields rustling gently in the distance. The storm had passed, but Rachel's mood hadn't lifted. She sat at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, chin resting on her knees. Everything around her felt so static, so quiet. Too quiet. No signal, no sounds of traffic, no escape. After breakfast, she slipped away, telling Ruth she was just going for some air. With her phone useless and her patience worn thin, Rachel wandered beyond the barn, past the chicken coop, and down a narrow path lined with wildflowers and worn stones. The air smelled of fresh hay and damp earth. She followed the trail without thinking, as if her feet needed movement more than her mind did. She hadn't meant to go far, but the winding path kept leading her, deeper and deeper into the woods behind the property. Trees arched overhead like cathedral ceilings. Birds called to one another. She took a breath and admitted, just barely, that it was beautiful, untamed, raw, and peaceful, in a way she wasn't used to. Then she stepped wrong. The ground beneath her shifted suddenly, a loose patch of gravel at the edge of a ravine. Her foot slid, her ankle twisted, and before she could react, her body was tumbling down. She crashed into a narrow gully, landing hard between two jagged rocks. Pain shot up her leg as she tried to move, and her heart pounded with rising panic. Her right foot was stuck, wedged awkwardly between rocks, and no matter how hard she tugged, it would not budge. "Hello?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the surrounding trees. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer. She tried again, louder. She cried out until her throat grew hoarse. Her palms were scraped, her knees bleeding, the heat pressing down on her like a weight. Sweat stung her eyes. She tried pulling again, screaming through clenched teeth, but the pain was blinding. Minutes passed, then longer. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Someone." Rachel's pride was the last thing to leave her. As the sun climbed higher, she felt it all slipping. Her strength, her anger, her polished edges. Tears welled up. She wiped at them with dirty hands, smearing earth across her cheeks. Then, just as her eyes were beginning to blur into darkness, she heard it, the sound of running, crunching footsteps, someone calling her name. "Rachel?" She tried to lift her head but couldn't. Then he appeared. Tom. His eyes scanned the ravine, and the moment he saw her, something in his face changed. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, he dropped down, carefully sliding down the rocky incline. Hey, stay with me," he said, kneeling beside her. "I've got you." "I'm stuck," she breathed. "My foot." He examined the angle quickly, his fingers moving with precision. Then, with one firm movement and a grunt of effort, he freed her ankle from the crevice. She gasped in pain. I know," he said gently. "It's going to hurt, but we've got to get you out of here." She couldn't speak. Her head dropped against his chest. Tom didn't ask for permission. He scooped her up into his arms, dirt, blood, and all, and began the slow, difficult climb. The slope was steep, the ground slick from the recent rain, but he moved steadily, carefully, never letting her slip. When they reached the top, he adjusted her weight against him, breathing hard, his shirt soaked with sweat and soil. Back at the house, Ruth rushed to meet them, her hands trembling. Tom carried Rachel into the spare room, cleaned her wounds, iced her ankle, and covered her with a quilt. She didn't say a word the whole time. Her eyes fluttered shut, overwhelmed by exhaustion. Hours passed. When Rachel finally stirred, she found herself lying in the small bed, light spilling in through the window. Her leg was propped up. The room smelled like soap and lavender. She turned her head and saw Tom sitting in the chair beside her, quiet, his arms folded, dirt still under his nails. Their eyes met. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Finally, in a voice so soft it barely reached him, she whispered, "Thank you. And I'm sorry." Tom didn't move, but his eyes softened. "That's enough," he said quietly. And in the silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like the start of it. The days that followed her fall passed differently. Rachel moved slower now, not just because of her injured ankle, but because something inside her had shifted. She watched the world around her with quieter eyes, no longer filled with impatience or contempt, but something closer to curiosity, humility, maybe. She began noticing the little things, the way Tom rose before sunrise to water the garden with care, checking the soil like it was a living thing, how he always brought a bucket of vegetables to the widow down the road without being asked, how he'd kneel in the dirt for hours helping the neighborhood kids build a tree swing, laughing like he had all the time in the world. No schedule, no emails, just people. Rachel found herself drawn to those moments, not out of boredom, but from something warmer she couldn't name yet. One morning she entered the kitchen before anyone else was up. The stove was cold, The air smelled like firewood and flour. On the counter sat a bowl of eggs, a jar of honey, and a handwritten note from Ruth that read, "Thought you might like to try." Rachel blinked, then smiled faintly. She opened a worn cookbook, its pages marked with smudges and notes in pencil. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over ingredients. No pre-mixed batter, no sleek appliances, just her, a bowl, and raw flour. It took her nearly 2 hours. The first batch burned, the second collapsed. The third surprisingly rose just right. She pulled the golden brown scones from the oven and stared at them, almost in disbelief. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. When Ruth came in, she gasped. "Did you make these?" Rachel shrugged, pretending not to be as proud as she felt. "I tried. Don't expect anything fancy." Tom wandered in minutes later, hair messy, shirt half-tucked. He picked up one scone, took a bite, and gave a nod of approval. "You might just pass for a country girl yet." Rachel rolled her eyes, but couldn't stop the grin from creeping across her face. Later that day, she helped Ruth in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, learning names of herbs she'd never cared about before. She even helped the boys with homework, her voice gentler than it had ever been when tutoring anyone. She was beginning to belong, and it startled her. That evening the sun dipped low, casting amber light across the fields. Tom and Rachel sat together on the front steps, watching the chickens wander, the sky slowly turning pink. Rachel sipped from a mason jar of lemonade and exhaled. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly. Tom shook his head. "No need. I have everything I want right here." She looked at him, really looked at him. His skin was tanned and rough from labor, his jaw lined with stubble, his eyes steady. "Even when it's hard?" she asked. "Especially then," he replied. "Hard doesn't mean unhappy, just means you're working on something that matters." Rachel was quiet for a while, then glanced down at her bare feet, dusty from walking in the yard. "I've had so much in my life," she said softly. "Things people dream about. But not one of them made me feel the way I did pulling those scones out of the oven." Tom smiled, leaning back on his elbows. She turned to him, her voice quieter now. "You live what most people would call a poor life, Tom." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She smiled. "But it's not. It's full. You have rhythm, meaning. And I think I've been missing that all along." Tom's gaze lingered on her for a moment. Then he said, "You're not the same girl who hated the smell of dirt 2 weeks ago." Rachel laughed under her breath. "I still hate bugs." "But you stayed," he replied, "and that says more than you think." Their eyes met again, this time with something softer, more tentative. "You're not a bad person, Rachel," Tom added gently. "You were just never given a chance to listen to the small things. Out here, the small things are everything." She swallowed, the lump in her throat unexpected. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not her father, not her friends, not even herself. They sat in silence a while longer, the only sounds the wind through the tall grass and the low hum of crickets. Rachel leaned her head on her knee, letting her eyes drift closed. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. She just had to be. And for once, that was enough. Rachel stood at the edge of the garden, sunlight warming her shoulders as she watched Tom coax new shoots of lettuce from the soil. His hands moved with a quiet purpose, firm but gentle. She liked watching him work. There was something peaceful in his rhythm, something grounded. She slipped her phone from her pocket and hesitated. It had been weeks since she last called home. There was no missed call from her father. There never had been. Still, she dialed. The line rang twice before a clipped voice answered. "Rachel?" She swallowed. "Hi, Dad. I wanted to let you know I'm safe." There was a long pause. "Where are you?" he asked, tone sharp. "In the country. I had some car trouble, but I've been staying with... Well, I'm okay. I just thought you should know." Her father did not ask if she was hurt. He didn't ask what she needed. He simply said, "Send me the address." "I'm fine, Dad, really. Rachel, address." She sighed and reluctantly gave it to him. hanging up with a tight knot forming in her chest. The next morning, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up the gravel driveway, its presence stark and foreign against the dusty trucks and clucking hens. Tom paused at the barn door, brow furrowed. Rachel stepped onto the porch just as the door opened and her father stepped out. He looked like he had come from another planet, tailored suit, polished shoes, and a kind of scowl that could clear a boardroom. "Rachel," he snapped, looking her up and down. "What the hell are you wearing?" She glanced at her jeans and dirt-smudged t-shirt. Her hands still carried the scent of rosemary from the garden. Her father swept his gaze across the property, the peeling paint on the barn, the worn fence, the little boys playing barefoot in the dirt. Disgust flickered across his face. "Get your things. We're going home." "I'm not leaving," she said quietly. "You're not staying here," he retorted. "You weren't raised to live in this kind of environment." Rachel straightened. "What kind of environment? One where people care about each other?" "This isn't real life," he snapped. "This is some fantasy you've wandered into. You think this farmer can give you anything lasting?" Tom stood in the background, silent, but his eyes were sharp, watching. Rachel's voice trembled. "He's given me more than you have in years." Her father's jaw clenched. "This man has dirt under his nails and a bank account smaller than your monthly allowance. He's not your future, Rachel." Tom said nothing, but the muscles in his jaw tightened, and he turned slightly away because no matter how much he tried to hide it, the words cut deep. Rachel felt caught between two worlds, the one that had raised her, molded her, and the one that had shown her how to breathe again. She looked at Tom, then at her father, the silence weighing heavy. Finally, she stepped forward. "I'll go," she said, her voice low but steady. Tom's gaze snapped to her, but he didn't speak. "I need to face things," she continued. "But I'm not going because you said so, Dad. I'm going to figure out who I am on my own terms." Her father raised an eyebrow, skeptical. She turned back to Tom, walking until she was just in front of him. Her voice softened. "This isn't goodbye," she whispered. I need to make sure I'm choosing this life because it's mine, not because I ran from something else." Tom nodded slowly. "You don't owe me anything, Rachel." She smiled through the sting in her chest. "Maybe not, but I still owe you a thank you for reminding me what life can feel like when you actually live it." She reached for his hand. He took it, just for a moment, holding it like it might slip away too soon. Then she stepped back, turned, and climbed into the SUV. The engine rumbled to life. Dust rose behind the wheels as the vehicle disappeared down the dirt road. Tom stood there long after it was gone. The hens clucked. A breeze whispered through the trees, and the quiet she'd once found healing suddenly felt like something else entirely. Like absence. Like hope, waiting in silence. The city was louder than she remembered. The honking horns, the rush of traffic, the metallic gleam of skyscrapers under the morning sun, it all felt too sharp, too fast, too much. Rachel walked into her father's office the day after she arrived, her shoulders squared, her heels clicking on marble floors with more resolve than she'd ever carried before. Her father looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. "You're back." "I am," she said evenly, setting her handbag on the chair beside her. "But not for long." He folded his hands, wary. "Then what are you here for?" "I came to say this in person." She paused, inhaling deeply. "If you want me to stay in this world of yours, sign papers, show up at board meetings, wear the name like a badge, then you need to let me live my own life. No more surveillance. No more sending people after me." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You think this life can be handled without control?" "I think I've learned more about life with a shovel and an oven than I ever did at a gala," she replied. "And if you can't respect that, then I don't want the money. I don't want the company. I don't want any of it." He stared at her, silent. The only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, he said, "You're serious?" "I've never been more." Rachel left without looking back. That night, She sat by her apartment window, staring at the skyline. Then she opened her laptop and began to type. The words came slow at first, then all at once. Memories of sun-warmed soil, laughter on a porch swing, the peace of a place that didn't expect her to be anything more than herself. She posted it on a whim, under the title, "The Girl Who Hated Dirt, Until She Learned to Grow Something." The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in. Strangers wrote about how they'd felt the same way, chasing something shiny, only to realize they missed what was real. Her inbox filled with messages from people wanting to know more about that farmer who changed your life. But there was only one message that mattered. It came 2 days later, in the form of a notification. Tom Bennett shared your post. She clicked the profile. His caption was short. "I read this 3 times. Still doesn't feel real, but I'm glad you remembered the way rain smells." Rachel closed the laptop, packed her bag, and bought a bus ticket. No more private cars. No more detours. Just a destination. 2 days later, dust clung to her boots as she stepped off the bus. The breeze was softer here, familiar, kind. She walked the long dirt road, past the familiar mailbox with peeling paint, past the tree she once thought was hideous and now found comforting. And then she stood before the gate of the farmhouse, the sun setting behind her. Tom stood on the porch, a wrench in one hand, a confused look on his face. Rachel walked toward him, slow, steady. "I'm not here because I have nowhere else to go," she said, stopping in front of the gate. He didn't speak. She reached for the latch, opened it, and stepped in. "I'm here," she said, voice trembling just slightly, "because I want to stay. I want to stop running. I want to—" Dung lie, right here. Tom looked at her for a long moment. Then he set down the wrench, walked down the steps, and stopped in front of her. "You sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," she whispered, "except how I feel when I'm here." He nodded once, then slowly, carefully he reached out and took her hand. This time, she didn't flinch. This time, she didn't run. And in that quiet, dusty yard beneath the amber sky, something that had been searching finally settled. The old barn had never seen so much life. Under Rachel's hand, the dusty wooden beams were strung with fairy lights. Chalkboard signs pointed visitors to berry-picking patches, hay rides, and the new bake-your-own scone stand that had quickly become the most popular attraction on the farm. What started as a quiet return had bloomed into something bigger, something real. Rachel and Tom had turned the land into more than a place to grow vegetables. It had become a space where city families could touch the earth, laugh through flower-covered faces, and watch their children chase chickens instead of tablets. Rachel handled the branding and the stories. Every post, every photo on their website carried her voice. Funny, honest, vulnerable. She called it the rooted life. She'd once run from dirt. Now she celebrated it. People showed up in droves. Kids painted pumpkins in the fall. Couples picked sunflowers in the summer. And more than a few tired souls found something healing in the quiet paths between rows of corn. And the children, Tom's nieces and the neighbors' boys, followed Rachel like ducklings. They called her Miss Scones. She laughed the first time and flushed with mock horror. "Miss Scones," she teased, brushing flour from her apron. "That's it? Not Queen of Baked Goods? Lady of Cinnamon?" "Nope," one shouted with glee. "You're Miss Scones forever." The name stuck. One afternoon, after the last visitors had left and the laughter had faded into the fields, Tom found Rachel sitting under the same oak tree where he'd first watched her grumble about bugs. She had her shoes off, her skirt tucked under her legs, and a small jar of blackberry jam in her lap. He walked up beside her and said nothing, just offered her a glass bottle of lemonade. She smiled without looking. "Tell me this isn't real, just so I can appreciate it again." He sat beside her. "It's real." For a while they listened to the wind ripple through the crops. Then Tom stood and held out his hand. "Come with me." She raised an eyebrow but took it. They walked in silence, his hand warm around hers, his steps steady beside her barefoot ones. He led her through the rows of vegetables, past the greenhouse, past the compost pile, and finally to the spot she recognized instantly. The edge of the gully, the place she'd fallen. Only now there was a bench, and wildflowers blooming all around it. Rachel slowed, breath catching. "You brought me here on purpose," she said. Tom smiled faintly. "I did." They stood together, looking down into the place that had once held so much fear and now looked like something reborn. He turned to her. "If you hadn't fallen," he said, voice low, "if you hadn't screamed and scared the life out of me that day." She laughed softly, tears already stinging the back of her eyes. "We might never have found each other," he finished. She looked up at him, her hand still in his, and whispered, "I think part of me needed to fall." He nodded. "And part of me needed to catch you." They sat together on the bench, their shoulders touching, the wind gentle between them. And for the first time in both their lives, they didn't feel like pieces trying to prove their worth. They felt like home. The sun was just beginning to sink when the music started. Soft strings from an old speaker, carried gently on the wind. In the middle of the field, beneath a canopy of wildflowers and twinkling lights strung from wooden posts, the guests stood and turned to watch. The aisle was just 2 rows of hay bales, covered in hand-sewn cloths and lined with scattered petals. There were no golden gates or champagne towers, but there was laughter, and there was love. Rachel stepped into the clearing, barefoot, the hem of her dress grazing the tops of the wild grass. Her gown was simple, made of soft linen she'd chosen herself from the little fabric store in town. It didn't sparkle, it didn't shine, but it moved like air, soft and free, and it belonged to her. Every stitch, every seam, every choice. She held a small bouquet of lavender and wheat. Her hair was pinned back loosely, the way Tom liked it best, and her smile was as radiant as the sky behind her. Tom stood waiting, wearing his best boots and a vest that Ruth had ironed herself that morning. His hair was still damp from a rushed wash, and his hands had a little soil under the nails, because he had refused to stop working until the very last tomato was tied properly. Rachel met his eyes and never looked away as she walked toward him. The people gathered were not elite or wealthy. They were neighbors, the mailman, the baker, the kids who had learned how to pull carrots from the earth because Rachel had taught them not to be afraid of dirt. Every one of them had brought something: pies, chairs, paper lanterns. It was a wedding stitched together with love, the kind you could taste in every detail. When Rachel reached Tom, he took her hands, and everything else fell quiet. The officiant, a retired librarian from the next town over, smiled and nodded to them. Rachel spoke first. "I spent so much of my life searching for more," she said, her voice steady. "More money, more praise, more proof that I was enough. And somehow I found everything I ever wanted in the middle of a field I once called nowhere." Tom squeezed her hands, his voice rough with emotion. "You made this place feel new again. You gave me the only thing I ever really needed. Someone who saw the worth in quiet things." They exchanged vows with tears in their eyes and laughter between lines. The kiss that followed was met with cheering and the clatter of tin pans from the barn, an old farm tradition Tom had insisted on reviving. As twilight wrapped the sky in soft purple and blue, the tables were filled with home-cooked dishes. Plates passed from hand to hand. Mason jars clinked with lemonade and sweet tea. Laughter rolled across the fields like music. Later that night, as the stars began to peek through the dark, Rachel and Tom sat at a long wooden table with Ruth and the children. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and the world was wrapped in golden silence. Rachel leaned her head on Tom's shoulder, watching the sky. She glanced at the children, messy-faced and smiling. She looked around at the place she once wanted to escape from, and she whispered just loud enough for Tom to hear, "I used to think I'd marry a millionaire, but I chose a man who plants love into the earth, one seed at a time." Tom turned, kissed her temple, and said, "And you made it all bloom." Together, under the stars, with dirt on their hands and joy in their bones, they stayed a little longer, just watching the night, knowing there was nothing more they needed, because home wasn't where you came from, it was where you chose to stay. Thank you for joining us on this journey through fields of love, forgiveness, and quiet transformation. Rachel and Tom's story reminds us that sometimes the richest lives are grown not in boardrooms or big cities, but in the soil beneath our feet, in the laughter of neighbors, and in the arms of someone who sees us as we are, not as who we pretend to be. In a world that moves fast and demands more, this tale whispers gently, slow down, breathe deep, and listen to the small things. Because sometimes it's the quietest moments that plant the strongest roots. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or maybe even brought a tear to your eye, we invite you to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. We share powerful emotional stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the beauty in everyday life. Because at Soul-Stirring Stories, we believe that some of the greatest love stories begin with a broken-down car and a helping hand. Hit that subscribe button, and let us bring you more stories that speak to your soul.